This is Tara Grenubbed with the Grounding and Growing Leadership podcast powered by Align, and this is episode 17. Have you ever just checked out for a while at work? Or as a manager, leader, or owner, have you ever decided not to have that hard, challenging, or clarifying conversation with someone who is checked out? In today's episode, we're going to explore the complex ins and outs of not just quiet quitting, but also quiet firing. Also, you'll hear that I briefly mentioned Gallup's State of the Global Workplace report. They literally just released their 2023 report, and it's not in the episode, but I wanted to mention here. This year's report brings two key recommendations from Gallup. One, focus on your most winnable employees. Nearly 6 in 10 employees are quietly quitting, but they're likely to become engaged with just a few changes. And that brings them to the number 2 recommendation, which is give them a better manager. Focus on upskilling your managers, leaders, and even you as an owner, upping your leadership game. If you want more information about how to up your leadership and management game, we have a lot of resources, and we hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome to the Grounding and Growing Leadership podcast, where everyone is a leader and leadership starts with you. I'm Tara.
And I'm Pamela.
Thank you for listening and inviting us along on your leadership journey. Hi, Pamela.
Hello.
So today we're going to have a conversation about quiet quitting and quiet firing, which maybe you've heard of quiet quitting, maybe you haven't heard of quiet firing. But given the job market, given the workforce, that issues and challenges that we're all dealing with in business, whether you are an individual contributor or a leader or a business owner, you felt the pain of people who are disengaged and not showing up at work. And so today we're going to talk about what these terms really mean, what contributes to them, and maybe just a few tools on how to make sure that you're actively combating or working against those quiet enemies coming in and derailing our teams.
Yeah. And we use terms like ghosting or shutting people out or detaching. And in certain ways, this is how this is showing up in the workplace. That, gosh, what would it does feel like this for some people, that their boss is ghosting them. Or all of a sudden, that person that was really engaged with the team is totally either distracted or detached or never really participates in a creative way anymore. And there isn't a conversation around it. And so I love that it's now been given a name so that we can address what is happening and maybe help to identify what's showing up.
Yeah, and I think it's a number of different things. So let's spend a little time talking about what it is. So we'll start with quiet quitting. So quiet quitting, it can mean a couple of things. So it's really just an unwillingness to put any additional or discretionary effort forward, a refusal to go above and beyond. So doing the bare minimum, like I'm going to do the bare minimum. I just saw these memes about nicknames to give people at work, and one of them was Justin, meaning they'll do just enough to not get fired.
Oh, super. Yeah.
So that's one definition of unwillingness to do any work outside their job description or what they feel compensated for.
Yeah.
Now, this is also interesting because you maybe have a job description and you have a compensation that goes with that. But if they feel like it's outside the realm of what they've been hired for, sometimes people who are quiet quitters will say no. And if that isn't just quiet quitters, which we should come back to. And then an unwilling to sacrifice life-work balance, mental health, or relationships for work. So if you haven't listened to our podcast series with Dr. Ashley Lang on generations, we go deeper into some of these things because some of these things are generational.
Yeah.
But really, I think it's saying no to hustle culture. So I'm not going to hustle for you. I'm paid for this amount of time, for this amount of effort. This is all I'm going to give.
Yeah.
So I think there's a challenge because in some cases it is quiet quitting where people are doing just the bare minimum and really probably are miserable because usually they aren't doing that because they love their work.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it's people who've put some healthier boundaries around work and maybe a culture that expects more than they really should be getting. And so it's hard to know sometimes the difference.
Yeah. And so a word picture for that might be the person on the one side that says, I don't want to adult today. And the other person that is trying to really take care of their mental health. Again, that work-life balance, and to be able to put some appropriate boundaries in here so that I can go be healthy outside of work and then show up as my best self within work. And the two of those come from a completely different point of reference and completely different point of motivation.
So true quiet quitting has to do with a disengagement of the employee. So them being disengaged, I want people to really challenge themselves to think about a difference between quiet quitting and having boundaries. Having healthy boundaries and expecting to be paid for the work that they do and not to be taken advantage of by their employer. I think that's one thing. But quiet quitting has more to do with usually 8 out of 10 quiet quitters are burned out. So usually they are burned out in every area of their life and they just have no capacity to figure out how to show up in a different way. So depression and anxiety, to be honest, often.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of frustration because the flip side of that quiet quitter is typically then we've got a third of the workforce who's doing most of the work and who's the high performers. And meanwhile, they're taking on more and more to overcome or compensate for these people who are underperforming. And then the high performers become burned out. And usually when a high performer becomes burned out, maybe they'll raise a flag once or twice, but if you're not paying attention, they'll just leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see this happening more and more. And there's a mystery as to really why they are leaving. And then that comes back to us as a leader because we are so busy overproducing that we haven't taken the time to see and hear and have those one-to-ones with people in the workplace to actually hear where they're going to fracture, where there's a stress point, and they're just eventually going to leave.
Yeah. So as a leader, then we have to make sure that we are showing up as our best selves as a leader. But also, there's this concept of quiet firing. So, quiet firing is, and I'm going to read this, I think this is from Gallup, a management approach in which managers forego the best practices of management, such as providing frequent feedback, coaching, development, and accountability, and instead do the opposite so that certain employees look elsewhere to find a new opportunity. I would also say quiet firing happens where someone isn't showing up. Maybe you've got someone who is starting to quiet quit and they are not performing. And instead of having authentic conversation with them to help them understand what's happening, to help you understand what's going on for them, to have compassion for them, we get frustrated, but just delegate their work to someone else and we work around them, which again adds more burden to our high performers or people pleasers who are willing to do whatever for you. And we create this really toxic dynamic at work.
Yeah. Yeah. And not feeling valued and not being ghosted of just not saying anything there, that leads to incredible insecurity in your position as a team member. And if your leader isn't being truthful with you as to what is going on, if they are not caring about your development as a team member, then eventually you will leave because a person can't stay in that situation for too long.
And a lot of times leaders are overworked, especially in the last couple of years. It's been really challenging. And it's possible that you've never been taught the skills to have those kind of coaching conversations, that no one has maybe modeled that for you. And so it feels maybe foreign to have to do that or to figure out how to do that. But also, it's just possible that you're running so hard that you just aren't taking the time. It can be really challenging when you feel like you're bailing water out of a boat. If you have a high turnover situation, to pause and have a conversation while the water pours in.
Yeah.
And it's so important. I just did a team session last week with a team they're a phenomenal team. They've just had some challenging circumstances and stress is high.
Yeah.
And they were honest. And a few of the people thought that us getting together for a half a day of team building and team connection and strengths work was stressful because they felt like their work was piling up. Again, the water's pouring into the boat, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So Tara, if that's how people are showing up today, and it feels like that is where their company is, and I don't have time to do any of this, like really, where is the most important place to start?
Yeah. So connection is probably the most important place to start. And that's what I was, the team I was talking about by the end,
everyone was grateful they spent the time because they got to reconnect and remember that they really enjoy each other and they have opportunity to rely on each other even more than they are right now. So what are you doing to foster connection with your team to make sure that you are connected with them and that they are connected with each other? And this happened to be a half day team day that we had planned for 6 months. It doesn't have to look like that. It can look like we have 10 minutes. What can we do intentionally to make sure people are connected? And we've talked about tools on the podcast to do that before.
Yeah.
The other thing is, do your leaders feel confident in having some coaching conversations? Do people know how to have a hard conversation with someone who isn't maybe meeting expectation? And if you've never done that before, it can be really scary. And we've said this before, the hardest part of leadership is having to practice on real people. you know, although that would be a really great use of AI. Being able to practice some of these skills on AI, maybe that exists. If you know of that existing, please reach out to us. We want to know.
Yeah. And to have that one-to-one conversation where that trust and safety is built. And when you do it regularly and you practice as a leader and say, hey, I'm not going to show up and do this perfectly, but I am practicing seeing, hearing, valuing, and developing my people. Then, Tara, what does it look like perhaps in those one-to-one goal conversations with those teammates to be able to develop them?
Yeah. So we've got a handout. I've got a handout, a download on the website. Actually, if you go to our website, aligntransform.com, if you scroll down halfway down the front page, there's a little form you can fill out to get this download, which is the 5 C's of an effective one-on-one. But having an effective one-on-one where you can celebrate the wins, really explore the challenges, clarify expectations, coach them, right?
Yeah.
And help them understand what's theirs to do. People just want attention. They want connection with you and they want connection with their role and why it's important.
Yeah.
And so if you as a leader can spend a little more time, and those one-on-ones could be, if you do them effectively, they could be 20 minutes. They don't have to be long. But Gallup came out with research this last year that said the number one most effective tool that you have as a leader is to do an effective one-on-one.
Wow.
It will increase your engagement, productivity, and profitability, guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are not doing if you are not doing one-on-ones with your team, it's the number one place to start.
Wow. Number one, increase of engagement. Let's talk about that word just a little bit, because I know that you've got some data on employee engagement, and that really drives the growth of your company. So this thing that you are searching for and longing for with your team, this really is about that engagement piece. Do you want me to share some of that data with our listeners, or do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, I've got some of it here. So Gallup does global workforce research all the time. And I apologize. They just came out with 2023's data yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. So I probably should have glanced at that. But last year, 32% of the workforce was engaged. 50% was not engaged. And by engaged, by the way, they are willing to spend discretionary effort. They'll put in thought. They'll put in critical thought. They'll think about how they can add value and they're excited to be there.
Yeah.
50% are not engaged. And that's the quiet quitting. So they're there, they're doing bare minimum, but there's not the connection with others or their work. And then 18% are actively disengaged. Those are the people doing damage. Those are the people rowing in the opposite direction and kind of toxic and pulling everyone else down with them.
Wow. So with those people, you said 18% right now. What is the kindest thing to do for your teams and for them as individuals and your company?
We've seen this over and over again. Asking someone who is actively disengaged. I mean, first of all, I will say your first order of responsibility there is, and the question I always ask is, have you had some clarifying conversations with that person? Do they realize the damage that they're doing? Do they understand what they're doing? And do they know what they should be doing instead? Have you had those conversations? I'm assuming that you've had a couple of those conversations with someone at that point.
Okay.
The healthiest thing you can do is to ask them to find a different team to serve on and to exit them from yours, because they are absolutely doing emotional and mental health damage to the rest of your team, not to mention workload complications, challenges, customer service challenges.
they're a kink in the hose for sure. And so removing them is going to probably decrease the burden of everyone else, even if the workload isn't there, even if the workload has to be dispersed to everyone else.
Yeah, that toxic person in the workplace, again, we talked about this in an episode on emotional maturity. It's that weak link in the team, and your whole team is going to feel it. And they are really waiting for you as a leader to step up, to bring them to health. And that has to be your role as a leader. And so, again, we're assuming that you've had a couple of those conversations, but then really the kindest thing that you can do for your team and for this person is to call them up. And if you haven't had that first conversation, I would love to give you just a little suggestion on how to show up there. Because again, that place of being curious to say, I've noticed that either you haven't been responding or that you've been responding in a way that shows up angry. And that's not typically you. So I feel like what I'm seeing is the tip of the iceberg. And I just wanted to ask, it's not like you to miss a deadline or to respond this way. Is there something else going on? And how can I come alongside and support you? And showing up that way, and is that you are noticing that something is off, but you are also giving them the opportunity to examine for themselves, like something's going on underneath and people are noticing. So that first conversation, really showing up curious and yes, naming what's true, but giving the person the opportunity to see people are noticing and I can't maintain this in a healthy, effective way moving forward is a great way to have that first conversation.
I think, I just learned this. I know that this is an old tool or framework from the therapy or psychology space, but I just learned it. So I want to bring it in here because I think it's helpful is the intent versus impact. And that's really what you're doing is I can see I know your intent is to help or be helpful. Because these actively disengaged, or maybe they're not actively disengaged. Maybe they're too engaged. Maybe they're causing drama, right?
Yeah.
Your intent is to connect with people. What is the intent that you can assume that's good? And then help them understand the impact, which might be opposite of their intent. And the impact is that you're creating disconnection and discord on the team. And helping them understand that a lot of times people will keep going because they truly don't see the impact that they're having because no one's helped them see it.
Yeah. So this is where this kindness comes in. And when you have created those one-to-ones, those regular one-to-ones where that relationship is established or that connection is established, that you are developing them. Say, for instance, someone's trying to connect with others on their team. And so they end up gossiping. And what I recognize is that if you are talking about someone else to me, that you will be talking about me to someone else. And so you then show me that you are an unsafe person. And so if my team is recognizing that then about me, I am losing trust and credibility to be able to be on a team with that person. And the kindest thing that a leader can do is make me aware of how your desire to connect actually is turning out like gossip and it's breaking trust rather than building it.
So good. We should probably at some point do a whole other episode just on gossip. Because it's a cultural killer.
It is.
It's a cultural killer. And if you don't feel like you have a good handle on gossip and how that's being handled at your workplace, it's an important thing to consider. So quiet quitting is a thing, but more importantly, are you quiet firing? Are you quiet firing people on your team? Are you really paying attention and giving them the connection, the clarity, and the coaching that they need? And if you are, and it's still not working, do you need to consider maybe it's time to find someone who's a better fit for that role? So the intent for you, leader, might be that you don't want to rock a boat, you don't want to add more burden to your team, but likely the impact is you are already adding to the mental workload of people. And in the long run, they will burn out faster by having that toxic culture.
Tara, this has been such an important conversation on healthy leadership and healthy teams. We want to encourage you to explore what is happening within your team using some of the tools that are available on our website. Again, those 5 C's that Tara talked about, please go to aligntransform.com where you can download that as far as those one-to-one coaching conversations. If you have any suggestions about other podcasts that you would like to hear or guests that you'd like to have on the podcast, please reach out at Tara@aligntransform.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and we will see you next week.
Come on.